yet again, my initial plans for a video have been set aside. I swear the next part of the Sailor Senshi as Genshin characters video is coming. I'm just being a perfectionist and trying to come up with something I'm happier with. You know, artist struggles. So, with this procrastination loop and wanting to make sure I got a video out on time this week, I just set aside the current headache until I have time to sort it out. So, we're finally talking about Inuyasha proper. I mean, really, I probably should have made this video before the Yashahime one, but I just had a lot of thoughts I needed to get out after I tried the manga. Plus, I've been finding myself going back to older series lately rather than watching much new stuff. I think I can count on one hand how much newer anime I'm currently watching these days. I used to be able to keep up with currently airing series, but now I guess I'm a bit more selective. And it's easier to just wait until a season is completely out and then binge it on my own rather than trying to keep track of when the newest episode is out. That said, Inuyasha is one of the first anime and manga I really got into. I grew up with Card Captors on Kids WB and Sailor Moon on Toonami, and also a heavily edited Tenchi Muyo on Toonami. Inuyasha came at the recommendation of some other kids my age, and yeah, we were probably a little too young for it considering it was on Adult Swim, but that didn't stop me from trying to stay up late to catch an episode. In middle school, a friend of mine had one of the initial editions of the translated version, one of those that were flipped to the Western way to make it easier for Western readers. Again, maybe still a little too young for it since the manga is a little more graphic than the anime, but I still fell in love with the world. There was something so cool about being able to travel back in time to what was almost an entirely different world and go on an adventure to essentially save the world. I'd like to say that was actually one of my favorite genres around that age, but I genuinely can't think of any other examples I read at the time, even though I'm sure I did. But I certainly did read a lot of fantasy adventure novels. If you have no idea what Inuyasha is, it's a manga by Rumiko Takahashi that first got serialized in 1996 and ran until it ended in 2008. It would later get an anime adaptation that ran for 167 episodes from 2000 to 2004. Then, a few years later, we'd get the final act, which wrapped up the end of the manga from 2009 to 2010. The series is about a 15-year-old girl named Kagome Higurashi who lives on the grounds of her family shrine. On the property, there's an old well. On her birthday, of all days, Kagome gets dragged through the well by a centipede demon who has the upper body of a woman. The demon declares Kagome has something called the Shikon Jewel, or the Jewel of Four Souls, said to be able to increase the power of any demon who possesses it. Kagome, understandably, freaks out about this, and unknowingly wakes up a power within herself as she pushes the demon away from her. When she finally climbs back out of the well, the sight that greets her isn't the shrine courtyard she expects. No, instead she's greeted by a forest clearing. This is not her home at all. She's been sent back hundreds of years in time to the Sengoku period of Japan. In addition to all that, there's a boy pinned to a tree by an arrow with white hair and 2 triangular ears on the top of his head. When Kagome approaches, she's interrupted by villagers. They bring her back to the nearby village because they think she's suspicious. I mean, her clothes don't match the era at all. She's in her school uniform because she was literally about to head to school. Once the village's elderly shrine maiden arrives, she notes Kagome's resemblance to her elder sister who passed 50 years before. Kaede really takes this all in stride, all things considered, and immediately begins trusting Kagome just because of this resemblance to her sister Kikyo. She tells Kagome about her sister, and Kagome wonders how she's going to get back home. However, this gets interrupted by the centipede demon again. After Kaede says they need to drive it back to the old well, Kagome takes it upon herself to lead the centipede demon away, showing immense courage even though the circumstances are honestly terrifying. However, the centipede demon does end up injuring her, revealing that the Shikon Jewel was inside of her body the entire time. As the reincarnation of Kikyo, whose body was burned with the jewel after her death, it was reincarnated through time with her soul to form Kagome. The centipede demon traps Kagome against the tree where the young boy is, though he's now awake, whether because of the presence of the jewel or maybe Kagome's own power. With the centipede demon consuming the jewel, Kagome takes a chance on the boy and pulls the arrow out. Or, well, she starts to, but it kind of just vanishes the moment she lays her hand on it. This is the titular Inuyasha, a half-demon who chases the Shikon jewel in order to become a full demon after a tangled past with Kikyo. This marks the first time Inuyasha and Kagome work together. Of course, with the centipede demon defeated, Inuyasha does immediately turn on Kagome, up until Kaede tosses out a string of beads and tells Kagome to shout out a word to subjugate Inuyasha with. Comically, the first thing that comes to mind is the iconic "Sit, boy!" Thus, Inuyasha is essentially leashed. They only really begin to work together in earnest after a crow demon steals the jewel and Kagome attempts to channel Kikyo's archery skills, continually insisting that she's not Kikyo but hoping to borrow some of that ability, which is incredibly unsuccessful until she gets the idea to tie one of the crow's dismembered legs to her arrow, since the crow keeps regenerating its flesh. Unfortunately, this works far too well, and Kagome's arrow ends up shattering the jewel into countless tiny shards. Thus, we now get the premise of the series, where Inuyasha and Kagome must work together to collect the shards once more, because Inuyasha has the power to fight against demons, and Kagome is the only one able to sense the shards. Initially, it seems like it's going to be a Monster of the Week sort of setup as they encounter different random demons who have come into the possession of shards and are causing trouble. Through this journey, there's definitely friction between the two. Inuyasha doesn't want to be seen as weak and refuses to rely on others, and there's some sort of lingering sourness against Kikyo, which we initially assume is just because Kikyo was the one who sealed him to the tree. But eventually, as more of our main cast are introduced, we start to see the overarching plot. There is someone out there who's manipulating things behind the scenes, aiming to gain the Shikon jewel for himself. We learn that Kikyo and Inuyasha were actually in love. While he had initially come for the jewel, the more time he spent with her, the more they grew close. Kikyo, who had to live her entire life as a stoic guardian of the jewel and keep it purified and always keep her guard up, was, for a little while, able to be a normal woman. It seems like it would have been a happy ending, right? So what went wrong? Why did Inuyasha attack the village and why did Kikyo seal him to the tree? It turns out they were victims of this antagonist's machinations. You see, Kikyo once cared for a bandit who had been badly burned and could no longer move. She took pity on him and attempted to nurse him back to health. However, the bandit fell in love with her for this kindness, and upon learning that she loved another, that he could never have her, he allowed his body to become host to countless demons also seeking the Shikon jewel. This formed the amalgamation of demons known as Naraku, who's attempting to discard his human heart and become a full demon. He tricked both Inuyasha and Kikyo, disguising as the other and making them think the other had betrayed them. They aren't the only characters who had their lives torn apart by Naraku either. Along the journey, we meet Moroku, who bears a curse he inherited from his father. His ultimate trump card in a fight, the wind tunnel. See, Moroku's grandfather had actually attempted to defeat Naraku, but was cursed with the wind tunnel in the process. A useful tool, but a double-edged sword. Eventually, the wind tunnel will grow until it devours the user. Moroku's father inherited this, and so too was devoured. Moroku joins because he wants to put an end to the curse before he too suffers the same fate. Sango's entire family was wiped out by Naraku's plans. And then he took control of her younger brother, the only other one left alive, in order to further manipulate her. Something incredibly tragic because the corrupted jewel shard is the only thing keeping her brother alive. And if they eventually take that back, her brother really will die. This is by far my favorite of Rumiko's works, though her newest series Mao is a very close second because it has a similar sort of vibe. The characters are all fascinating, though I think I was too young to truly appreciate all of them when I first started getting into it. See, as a kid, I hated Kagome and Kikyo both. I thought Kagome was boring and mean, and I thought Kikyo just needed to go away. My favorite characters were Sango and Inuyasha, And while that definitely hasn't changed, I actually really enjoy Kagome and Kikyo's characters so much more now that I'm older. Thinking back on it though, I think a lot of that came from the anime, which I watched way before I was ever able to read through the entirety of the manga, which is what changed my perspective entirely. I cannot stress enough that while Inuyasha is one of my favorite series, it is very hard to recommend to other people, at least anime-wise. You see, the anime exaggerates a lot of the relationship drama. Kikyo is eventually brought back from the dead, a portion of Kagome's soul literally sucked out to inhabit a clay husk. The anime plays up the idea that Inuyasha is still in love with Kikyo, and he always runs off whenever he catches a whiff of her scent. While this is present in the manga, Inuyasha is actually much more direct with Kagome about why this is. It's not that he still loves Kikyo, but he feels guilty for the things she went through, that it's his fault she died, so he feels like he owes her something. But it's very, very clear in the manga early on that Inuyasha is already falling for Kagome. He makes it clear that he wants Kagome by his side, and for her part, Kagome is happy to be able to stand beside him and help him, because she is also falling in love with him too. Of course, they bump heads a lot, but not nearly as much as the anime makes it seem. I'm pretty sure there are far more sit boys in the anime than there are in the manga. Right off the bat, Inuyasha accepts Kagome as a wholly different person. To him, Kagome is Kagome. She's not a replacement for Kikyo. Where he initially wanted to become a full demon, Kikyo wanted him to become a human and live with her, which he does seem to consider. Kagome, however, Kagome loves and accepts him exactly as he is, which is something Inuyasha has always craved. His entire life, he's just wanted to be accepted. But half-demons really aren't treated well. They're not really welcome on either side, either too monstrous for humans or too weak for demons. But through Kagome, he finds someone who loves him for who he is and doesn't want to change anything about him. He finds a family who accepts him, an entire village he can call home now. It's just told in such an engaging way in the manga, but the anime muddles it all up to rack up the drama. Kagome is also one of the kindest characters in the whole series, and I'd argue one of the bravest. While the others at least have some experience with battle, Kagome has none to start with, but she still puts on a brave face and gets the thing done. And sure, she's still a young teenage girl and does react as such, especially in the beginning. But you have to remember, this is all new to her. She certainly didn't ask to be thrown back in time and have to fight monsters. But throughout the adventure, she matures, growing into a brave and confident young woman who is willing to face down any foe for the sake of the friends she's made. And in turn, Inuyasha learns so much from meeting Kagome and being by her side. He also matures throughout their time together, from a brash and arrogant young man who is scarred by his past, to someone that can stand tall in spite of that because he's finally made genuine connections. Kikyo also accepts this. While there's still a part of her that wishes she could have been the one by Inuyasha's side, she also realizes that what she wanted wasn't what Inuyasha really needed. When she's gravely injured once again just before the final confrontation with Naraku, they have a wonderful goodbye where they get to part on more amicable terms. Kikyo is truly happy for Inuyasha and Kagome both in those moments, and she uses the last of her power to free Sango's brother from his reliance on the Jewel Shard, freeing him from Naraku's control and granting him his life back. I find Inuyasha and Kagome to have such a well-written relationship. Watching them slowly come together, the way they worry and care about the other, their willingness to silently watch over each other, and the absolute trust they have in each other just gets me every time. This just makes it all the more irritating that Inuyasha and Kagome weren't even able to raise their daughter in Yashahime. Given Inuyasha's whole arc, starting out ostracized with only his mother and having such a lonely childhood, it feels like such a slap in the face that they chose to have his daughter experience the same freaking thing. The Yashahime manga at least alleviates this somewhat because Moroha and Setsuna were at least raised in Kaede's village. But still, Inuyasha and Kagome don't get to be there for their own daughter, and that makes me so mad. However, on that note, I feel like Sango and Moroku have a bit more development in the anime. It feels much easier to see the way they grow closer over time. Their moments are quieter than Inuyasha and Kagome's developments, but I'll admit, that first time Sango kissed him when they thought they were going to die still gets me. I do feel like Moroku's wandering hand and womanizing habits ruin it a bit, but at the very least, it seems by the time everything is over, he's left that behind and focuses purely on Sango. The platonic relationships, though, are just as well written in my opinion. I love the sisterhood that develops between Kagome and Sango, and the brotherhood between Inuyasha and Moroku. Sango and Moroku are very much the older siblings of the group. Watching the two of them and Shippo quietly watching over Inuyasha and Kagome as they grow closer is just so funny and heartwarming, especially when they call Inuyasha out on his BS. The absolute fear in Inuyasha's face when Sango expresses frustration with his obliviousness and attempts to use Sit Boy on him is still one of my favorite comedic moments. I genuinely have so much love for this series, but it's so hard to recommend because the memes about the anime really are true. Inuyasha and Kagome do yell each other's names a lot. They fight so much more in the anime, and it's so hard because I think both the sub and the dub of the anime was cast so well. Everyone fits their characters perfectly. But the love triangle just gets played up so much that I just get so exhausted when I try to rewatch the anime. It's only remotely entertaining when Koga is around, because it's clearly shown that Kagome is not interested in Koga that way. But Inuyasha and Koga still butt heads over it in the funniest ways. The openings and endings are also fantastic, and I still listen to them to this day. But if I'm going to recommend Inuyasha to anyone, it's going to be the manga. Please, read the manga first. The manga is so much better, and the initial art style in the beginning of it is genuinely one of my favorite art styles ever. And I wish I could replicate it better because that's my favorite era of Rumiko Takahashi art. When you finish the manga, then you can attempt the anime. However, I will say the movies are fantastic and feel very much in line with the spirit of the manga. If nothing else, I recommend the third movie the most out of the four. It's so good, and we actually get a little more backstory for Inuyasha, and just, it's by far my favorite of the movies. Still, there is something nostalgic about going back and watching the anime though, seeing that old, kind of fuzzy quality of older anime. The colors seemed more saturated and vibrant. And one thing I appreciate about Rumiko Takahashi's works is even when there is nudity, it's not treated as fan service. It's not glorified. In fact, it kind of gets glossed over for the most part. It's always done in such a tasteful way that I find I really don't mind it. Rumiko even took great care to make sure there weren't any panty shots of Kagome when she's wearing her uniform in the anime. Basically, to summarize, please read the manga, then go whichever direction after that. While it probably is more convenient to watch the anime, I feel like you miss out on so much of the nuance and storytelling from the manga, when so much gets played up for drama. Like, I promise the love triangle between Inuyasha, Kagome, and Kikyo is not nearly as much of a big deal as it is in the anime. I was genuinely baffled when I finally read through the manga and realized it was barely even a thing. It genuinely gave me character development, and now Kagome is one of my favorite characters. And I can appreciate Kikyo so much more for the tragic figure she really is. As usual, here's our look at the final piece. I'm actually really happy with how this turned out. For once, my line art doesn't look so shaky and unsteady. Like, sure, it's not perfect, but I still feel like it's the neatest it's been on this channel so far. I also really love how the tree came out. Like, all that practice I did in the last piece must have paid off because this looks really good to me. I initially thought about doing a redraw of that scene where Inuyasha and Kagome are sitting on the hill together, but I just kind of took inspiration from it instead. And since I talked about how the others watch over them grow closer, I had to include them. It's just so funny. Like, Shippo's like, are you really sure they're gonna get together? Like, I bet they're gonna start fighting any minute now. And Moroku's just like, trust the process, please. Anyway, I'm really happy with this. I think it turned out pretty good. As always, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Much like the Yashahime video, this one ended up being pretty long. I guess I just have a lot of feelings about this series since it was one of my first, and I still hold it very near to my heart. Thanks for listening to me ramble, and I hope I've managed to convince you to check out the manga at least. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a like and consider subscribing. I talk about anime, manga, and occasionally more art-focused videos. If you'd like to support me, I also have an Etsy shop, which I'll link down below. Until then, see you next time.